T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, my name's Ari Flagle, and I'm fascinated with Boelens pythons. For the last 16 years, I've been traveling to the remote areas of West Papua New Guinea and Papua New Guinea, searching for this elusive snake, to study these animals in the wild, and to gain as much knowledge as we possibly can. So join me and my guests on the Boelens Python Roundtable.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another exciting episode of the Boelens Python Roundtable. I am your host, Ari Flagle, and this is episode 8. Hope everybody's having a good weekend. I don't even know what day it is. So everybody's gearing up for the holidays, which is always crazy this time of year. So I'm trying to pre-record some stuff because I'm doing some traveling things. And I've got a really exciting guest that I'm really happy to be able to finally work down a time to bring on. So let's go ahead and bring on Mike. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Good day. I'm doing great.
Mike Jodry from Canada.
That's right. Americans say the Great White North, but it's
right, the Great White North. I'm glad we finally able to make this work, man. It's been like kind of playing back and forth on times and everything, and I understand I even had to have you not party so hard last night at your Christmas party, which I appreciate, for the roundtable interview, which is always good. So, but how you been, man? It's been a long time. We've been buddies for a long time.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we've known each other a long time. All right. It's things are good. I'm still keeping a few animals. Not really many breeding projects these days. Just growing out some animals.
I'm loving your shirt, by the way.
Yeah, I wish I could get some Parsoni in Canada. So
yeah, well, I can get Parsoni here. I can get Parsoni here, but you can get Fiji Islands. So I guess that's a good
that's
trade.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, and that kind of goes into like one of my first questions I was going to start asking you, like, what's the? I mean, obviously, I have very limited experience of being in Canada. I think my only time I was there was when I turned 18 and I drove across the border to get porno mags and cigars.
Is that right?
I guess that's like initiation or like, whatever it is when you turn 18 or something like that along those lines. But so it was like a very quick trip for me.
Okay.
Yeah, what is like the herpetoculture scene in Canada like for people that really don't know?
So yeah, I'm not directly in the loop right now like I was, 10, 15 years ago, but I think it's pretty strong. Ontario still has a pretty strong herp community. They have their big reptile shows there 4 times a year, I believe. And then out west as well. I've never been into the shows in Western Canada, but I hear they've gained a lot of traction, and we have a healthy herp community here for sure. And then where I am on the east coast of Canada, there's a few herpers around. So they have I guess I'm the odd guy out because I have a lot of crazy stuff that you normally don't see. I shouldn't say that. I do have some cool gecko buddies that have some, they've bred many firsts here. So there's some good diversity here for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I need to make it out there. I'd love to visit, maybe give a couple talks or something like that. That'd be always fun. I'd always like to be in Canada. It'd be neat.
Yeah, that would be great. And I know they often do bring in some reputable speakers to the big shows in Toronto.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
I guess I would be considered reputable, so that'd be nice.
You would, yeah. You're high up there.
No. I'm at the low of the totem. I'm just kind of floating by. But anyway, so you've obviously been actively involved in reptiles, I assume, your entire life. Can you kind of like give me like a breakdown of like, when you started working with stuff, and like what was your, like, did you have that moment that we all share, like as a child, where we catch a snake or a lizard or a turtle or something like that really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I do. It was different for me, and it wasn't until I started, going to, or seeing how far ahead the hobby was as far as what you were allowed to keep in the States. Like I didn't realize that as a kid early on. So fast forward, it was pleasantly, once I came to the States and went to shows, it was nice to see that there's so many common-minded people, I guess. Because here I just felt like I was a little bit I was a bit of an outsider. But so I started, I guess I was probably 6, 7 years old. And when I started catching snakes, my grandparents had a cottage on a small island. And I remember, seeing a garter snake, and it just piqued my interest, and I grabbed it. The thing bit me, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." It didn't hurt, and I was kind of like, "Oh, look, the snake just bit me." Blah blah blah. And then I just kind of got hooked from there. And then, the more I talked with snakes, people were scared of them. I couldn't understand that. I thought they were just so cool. They're incredible animals. They don't have hands, they don't have feet, but yet they can survive, and they can generate such awe and fear in some people. So I thought it kind of intrigued me. So then. Yeah, so I'd catch snakes. Then I started working at a pet store when I was actually underage. I wasn't even supposed to be working there. But anyway, I started working there when I was 12. And so I was keeping local snakes. So here in Nova Scotia, we have 5 native species of snake. We have the, I'll just stick to the common names. We have the northern red-bellied snake. We have the northern ringneck snake. We have the maritime garter snake and the smooth green snake. Did I say northern ribbon? Yes, I did. Yeah. Yes. I think I named 5 in the ringneck. So anyway, I was always keeping those, and then the pet store I worked at brought in a Louisiana milk snake. So then I started leaning towards keeping other herbs. That was the first exotic snake I had acquired, and that bugger, I tell you, he went. I don't know how he did this, but he went 6 months without eating, wow. And he was like the Houdini of snakes. He was like 31 inches roughly, size of my finger, and that thing could escape from anywhere. It was crazy. Like sometimes we'd go on trips and I'd get my friends to take care of, and I also acquired a corn snake. So my friend would take care of this milk snake, and oh my God, it would get out in his house and he'd be the paranoid. He's like, Mike's going to freak if I lose my snake. And he doesn't get it back when he comes home. But one time they found it in the stove, like in the bottom pot for it, with this milk snake. He was crazy. So anyway, yeah, he went 6 months without eating. He wouldn't eat any mice or anything for me. And I found a bird nest on the ground. It just said this little, a sparrow or something. And I just found some little tiny eggs, and I offered those, and then he started eating those. And then, that was it. Once he started eating those eggs, he moved on to small mice. And I used to keep everything together because I didn't know any better back then. So I had like red bellies and ringnecks. And one time I caught him munching down a red belly. I'm like, oh, that's not cool. I better separating this guy. So
right.
Yeah. And then from there, I got my first boa in like 87, and he lived like 18 years. He was just a regular Colombian boa. And so I just kind of grew from there. I didn't get too crazy into breeding anything at that point. I found some smooth green snake eggs when I was a kid, and I hatched those out, which was super cool because all the literature I had back then said, oh, these die quickly, in captivity because you can't get them to eat. And I hatched them out, and I kept them right through the winter. And you would know this, but a lot of people may not know that smooth green snakes are black when they hatch out. And
I remember hatching them when I was a kid. They were super cool.
Yeah, they're awesome. So I remember I had the terrarium set up, and he was stretched out on this piece of log, and I put some spiders in there, and I could see him, trying to catch this spider. And I thought, wicked, this guy's actually he's gonna live and he's gonna thrive. And so it was really cool. I got him to eat and stuff. And I used to, the winters would get pretty cold here, not as cold as out west, but it would be hard to find food. You could buy crickets in the pet stores and stuff, but they were often too big. So I'd go in the garage at home up high where the house spiders were, and I'd like pull them down, and
nice.
They're frozen state, and feed these little green snakes, and they were really cool. So still one of my favorite snakes to catch here. I don't see them as many, obviously with the use of pesticides and stuff. I did find one on my property. I can find all the snakes here where I live, just outside of Halifax, except for the northern ribbon snake. They live in 2 counties here, Queens and Lunenburg County, and I've done some help with that, some research and stuff with just studying their hibernacula and stuff. But it's cool that there's one little ecosystem in Nova Scotia where you only have, and it all has to do with the glaciers, how they formed and stuff. There's certain species that only live there that are nowhere else in the province. So we have the northern ribbon snake, and we have the Blandings turtle. So there's
cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love green snakes. They're fantastic. We find them out here on the property, and I've herped them in many other places, and they always are just like such a wonderful snake. I really wish they would have picked up in the hobby more. It's like a perfect snake. They're green, so they're attractive looking. They're really calm. They eat insects.
Exactly.
They're diurnal, which is great too. So they're just such a cool snake. And like you said, the breeding is super cool. Like I remember hatching them out, and I'm like, what? These are like black, and they're this very, very cool little snakes. But so
Yeah.
when did you? So obviously you grew and you started keeping more stuff, and you as we were talking earlier, you still you have some aspadites, so you've got some blackheads, you've got some Leachianus geckos, and some green tree pythons as well. Something really cool to note that you have Rico and Trooper Walsh lineage green tree python still, which is very, very cool. So like at what point?
I do. I just have one animal. So I had an Aru type female. That it's funny because I play drums too. I actually traded a drum kit for this Aru type female. She was beautiful. And I don't even, she was just sold to me as I traded for a high blue Aru female. So she came from a breeder in Ontario. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a male. So I had met Rico, and I acquired a male Merauke mix, which came from him through Trooper Walsh. And then, I bred those a couple times. So I bred chondros, which is pretty cool. And I just have one animal left from there. She's about 14. And just kind of, and she's a high blue animal, but she's looking a little rough these days, but she's still eating and doing everything that she should do. I used to have more. I had a pair of Kokoyu that I got from, one came from Rico and one came from Chuck. And they were doing good. They kept their yellow right through into adulthood, and then they developed a crazy skin disease. And unfortunately, I lost them, just like many chondro owners know. Sometimes they can just drop dead overnight.
Unfortunately, that works with a lot of stuff. You get a lot of that sensitive stuff like that, where you just walk in the room, you basically, rip a fart, and you've got animals dropping off sticks. It's turn the key and it works. But that's super cool that you've got those animals still in. And as you were progressing into, more and more keeping and doing this, obviously this was more like personal hobby stuff, correct? You weren't utilizing this as a business model or anything for, making a living by any means, right? Or
no, it was a hobby. I just kind of wanted to fund my hobby, and so I did run it as a business for a little while, and do some talks and stuff like that. And when my kids were younger, I'd go to schools and stuff and give talks and just kind of educate. And and then it wasn't until, so if you back up, so when I was a teenager, I had the one boa that lived to be just shy of 18, and had I known now what I knew then, he probably would have lived a lot longer, because I know people who've had them into the 30s, right? But it just the way he wasn't kept to today's standards, and if I hadn't known, he probably would have lived a lot longer. And then you get interested in girls, your passions change and all that. Out of snakes, and then it wasn't until the early 2000s where I met some people that were breeders, and it just kind of re-sparked the interest. And I saw how the hobby had grown, and in the States and everything. Like I say, I was always an animal lover. I just wasn't keeping many, and obviously with school and stuff, you kind of things change. But so early 2000s, the passion was reignited, and what did I get? So I was in a partnership. Well, I had it unfortunately went sour, like a lot of business reptile partnerships. But anyway, the people I knew at the time, they wanted me to go in on a group of Boelens pythons, and they were well accredited breeders. I'm not going to mention their names because they really have nothing good to say about them now. I'll keep it at that. But anyway, I went in on a pair of Boelens, and eventually I ended up getting screwed out of that. And then I found another fellow in Canada had a trio for sale from Vancouver. His name was David Kwok, and he had brought the animals in from Don Patterson, who a lot of people, he's a well-known Canadian breeder. He's done many great things. So I acquired these animals through David Kwok. It was they arrived here November 22nd. It was in 2006. It was cold as hell.
Now, was this your first introduction in the species, or like, where did you did you know about them before?
Oh yeah. So I knew about them, and then these other guys that I temporarily worked with, like when we brought them in, I got to go and see them and just how amazing they were. The first time I saw Boelens, it would have been in the 80s, because I collected all the boas and pythons manuals. So I can't tell you the exact one, but it was one of the TFH books.
Okay.
I believe the picture was, it was beautiful. It was a black and white animal, and it was from the Barker's collection, I believe. So I'm like, wow, that's cool. And no one else. I just hadn't heard of them, and then I heard people in Canada have them, and I just, I started looking into them and researching them, and the opportunity came up for them to buy an adult pair, or for me to go in on the male, and then like I say, that relationship went sour, unfortunately, but I did get my own, which was even better. I was in charge of them. They were young. I could grow them up the way I wanted to, and
Do you mind if I ask you what you paid for them back then?
Yes. Yeah. No, that's fine. No, it was a steal. No,
You're like, yes.
No, it was a steal. It was $7,500, so 2,500 per animal.
It's about what
Canadian,
they were before.
and that's
Yeah.
Canadian. Yeah, and the Canadian, and they're all yeah. So, well, what are they now? You'd pay what, $6,000 per animal, wouldn't you? I don't know. I had in BR or more. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was yeah. I couldn't. Yeah, I managed to get the money together, and I thought, yeah, no, this is a long-term project, and I went and got custom cages. I did everything right, or so I thought, just to try and raise them properly, and then
So,
shortly
like,
thereafter.
So when you, oh yeah, I'm sorry. So like when you acquired your animals, your younger animals, right? You said, or
Yeah.
when you acquired your younger animals, how old would you say they were?
I would say so. I can't tell you exactly. I think that probably 18 months, because they were just starting to go.
So they were still little guys. They were still red.
So they're just starting to go through their ontogenic color.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
So you would say, like, it's well a year.
Yeah, probably within that
14
first year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then like once you acquired your animals, were you just like sourcing out information? Were you talking to other individuals? Like, how did you move? Like, obviously you knew what these animals were because you saw them in, some of these other, pieces of literature from individuals talking. I mean, anybody that's into boids and pythons knows what a Boelens python is, obviously.
Yes.
What route did you go as far as to acquire, like, what you were doing with these animals, like how you were going to set them up and stuff?
Yeah, well, I just did what most people would do nowadays. I researched the hell out of it, and I made some good contacts, like some great veterinarians that work with them, like mainly in the States. Like Mary Rush was a wealth of knowledge for me. I contacted her, and she was gracious. And I traveled to one of the IHS shows that she presented at, and I built a relationship with her. So it was like free advice. I mean, we have some decent reptile vets here in Nova Scotia, but knowing that every species is different, as you know.
Yeah.
And I figured she had an extensive knowledge with the species. So I talked to her, and obviously I looked up you, Ari. I did a lot of reading with your work. I used to be.
I was like a baby. I was a baby then. That was like baby Ari days.
Well, sorry, a little later on. So no, it was just kind of trial and error, I guess, starting off. I just, whatever I could find online, there was a lot of forums and stuff like that. So I just, and obviously the fellows that was in the partnership with, I kind of followed what they said. And obviously Don Patterson, early on had, multiple conversations with him, because he's the one that brought them in, and he had grew the other pair up. So I just, and then I talked with, briefly with Mark Spataro early on to see what, how he was setting his animals up. So, I went that route, and like I say, I just mostly online through email networking, just tried to find the best way.
And when you so like, how did you start work? Like, what did your husbandry and your kind of like acclimation for your young animals when you acquired them? Like, what was your routine with them? Your setup, your enclosures, your lighting, dietary stuff like that thing. Like, what did you implement right off the bat?
So obviously I did the quarantine. Actually, I was really shocked, because when they arrived, I didn't know then, like, how. I knew they could withstand cooler temperatures, but when I arrived, I had my temp gun. It was like in the 60s, and these little things just seemed like they were almost shivering. And I was freaking, like, I had, they're an expensive animal, and I'm like, oh my God, are they going to die? And I called the guy I bought them from, like, what the hell, and they're actually, they had mites. I'm like, what, where the hell did these come from? How can they?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I treated them with nicks. I had some PVC cages made up. They were roughly 3 feet by 2, a foot high. I had bought pro panels from
okay.
Yeah. Drawing a blank on the guy's name. But anyway,
we're doing the heated panels,
the
as
radiant
opposed to like incandescent, like heating elements or anything like that.
No. It was the radiant heat panels, and then I had my thermostats. It was I had someone make the thermostats for me, and I had temp probes. I had 2 hides. So I just kept paper because I wanted to monitor them closely. I didn't use substrate at first. I was just, I typically don't do that.
Well, you're dealing with the mites too, so
yeah. And the mites, and once I found, and then Pro Products also developed Prevenamite, which I found out, later, and that stuff worked awesome as long as you follow the directions. Like you spray the substrate, and man, those mites were gone. And I was very careful with the application, because I've heard of other people who lost animals from using that, but I always had great luck with it. So that eradicated the mites right away. They never came back. And that's one, I've only dealt with mites a few times, really, you know, and the entirety of me keeping reptiles. So I've been fortunate like that. So so yeah, I had plastic water bowls, and I just drilled out a hole, and I had the thermostat on one. So I basically had a height on each side, so it could kind of thermal regulate where it wanted to be, whether it wanted to be under the radiant heat panel or under the cooler side. And then I had a nighttime drop, so I let that go into the 70s when they were young. So, and I kept that. Yeah, I guess I had them in those cages for close to about 3 years, and then I had custom cages made through animal plastics, and again, I went with PVC, but I did custom sizes. They're roughly 24 inches deep, 22 high, and 6 feet wide. So ample space, 2 sliding glass doors. They had decent ventilation in the back. And I was told I should introduce using Mega Ray mercury vapor bulbs. So, you know, because where they come from, there's high UV. And so I used that. And then I started running into.
And what size? What size? I'm sorry to cut you off. What were the size of the animals, or roughly the ages of them, when you moved them into these larger enclosures and started incorporating these Mega Ray mercury vapors?
Yeah, so I would have had them for roughly 3 years. So, okay. But if you add on, so if they're just going to their color change, they're roughly a year and a half old, I'd say. I didn't actually have the hatch date for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're roughly getting close to 6 feet. You know. Okay. Yeah. And then, I was using mercury vapor bulbs, but then I started running into regurg issues. I didn't have any regurg issues when they were younger. And then once I moved them into their other enclosures and stuff, I started, so I thought, well, they're being kept too warm. So I cut back on the timing I was using with the mercury vapor bulbs, thinking that was causing the issues, just too hot. And the strange thing I found with the Boelens is they always wanted to be under that intense heat. And I know they say, well, they'll thermal regulate and go where they want, but for whatever reason, they would just always, if that light was on, they were there.
Boelens will love to bask.
But in the wild, they know, they're going to die if they do that. So why? It's kind of strange.
It's interesting. One of the other things too is I don't know if so for people that are listening and they're not familiar with the mercury vapor, Mega Ray bulbs, they're still available, I believe, right? I mean,
I think so.
I think so. Yeah, they're great. They're great bulbs. I'm not knocking them at all. Yeah. But they're utilized. The intention, from what I understand, from what their application is for really large enclosures, because they provide huge amounts of UV, which is not a problem. However, it needs to be able to be dispersed and distributed evenly through the enclosure. So these are not bulbs that you're going to want to use for something that, like you said, 20 inches tall or even shorter. I mean, you're going to burn them up or whatever is in there, even if they require high amounts of UV. And obviously, habitat where the animals are found, super high amounts of UV, but it's in nature. So you've got places for the heat and the UV to distribute naturally, as opposed to being in a confined area. So just for people to know that, I don't want them to go running out and buy mercury vapor bulbs and stick them on their enclosures that are smaller, because you possibly will have problems, like you were saying, in this situation. Why was and the only recommendation for it was just because the animals require or are exposed to high amounts of UV in the wild, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's what it is. Now the mercury vapors also put off heat as well too, so it's a combination. I did find something interesting when I was at the zoo. And I was in charge of the group of Boelens that we were working with there. I had done a study, and I don't remember, as I'm getting older, which sounds weird, I can't remember what I say and what I don't sometimes, but I think I said it in one of the earlier podcasts about how I had done a study for about 3 years with the females and the males, well, obviously the group, where I would take I would do a simple just basking bulb, 100-watt Zoom Ed bulb, because of the consistency of the product with Zoom Ed, and that doesn't put off UV. And then I would do a fluorescent strip, 5.0 or 10.0 Zoom Ed bulb, also, once again, for the consistency, because it wasn't that I was looking for immense amount of UV. I was looking for consistent amounts of UV from packages. And that's one thing I really like, because I utilize both Zoom Ed, Arcadia, and Exoterra with certain products. And I know I can take a Zoom Ed bulb from, California, one in Canada, and they're going to be putting off relatively the same amount of UV. So it's not going to be like a huge spike of anything like that. And back to the story, I would have on the far left side of the enclosure, right above the nesting box, I would have the UV strip. And then on the far right side, I would have a log that they could bask on. And the obviously throughout the year, they would bask and blah, blah, blah. They'd go in their nest box, this and that. But I would always find the onset of follicular development during the females' times that the females would gravitate always towards the UV light source. And they would completely leave the basking heated element side alone until the follicular cycle was done. And in my case, it didn't last but a few months because I didn't have success reproducing them. And this was just a study. So, it could be a lot of it too, where in that particular situation where you're utilizing a bulb that puts off UV as well as heat, that the animal is seeking out that UV source that it's wanting, it knows it needs, but yet it's not, in a weird way, it's not really paying attention to that heat as well that's accompanying it. So it's not regulated right. And that's why when I set up my animals, I have a separate heating element, and then I have linear fluorescent tubes that are like the T5s that I'm using.
Yes.
So anyways, I just wanted to add that in there. Go back. Anyways, continue.
Yeah. So that's how I started out. But then once I started having those issues, then I did move to a similar setup to what you just mentioned. It was the ZoomEd. It was like a 45 watt bulb, I believe. So I put that on one side, and then I had the tube for the UV.
How often did you notice, like when you started, like when you put those mercury vapors in there, because obviously, do you remember what size it was? Or
they're 100 watts.
100 watts. Okay. And then you said you started seeing regurgitation stuff.
Pardon me?
You saw regurgitation behavior started happening, right?
Shortly, yeah.
Okay.
It was around that time.
Do you remember, like, roughly around, like did it initially just like automatically start, or was it progressed over in time in that setup? Or I'm just curious and throwing ideas out.
I was looking back at my notes just to see, because, like I said, this is going way back. It was shortly after. I might have had one or two regurges when they were smaller in the other cages, but most of them started happening in the bigger cages, and then it seemed to carry through.
Interesting.
2 to 3 times a year, even after I switched. When I just went to the smaller basking, I got rid of that intense UVB, and I come in and mimicked your setup.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from all the Boelens keepers most of them I've spoke with. There's only a few that didn't seem to have the issue, but it seemed like sometimes they would go like almost a year, no regurg, and then strangely they would do it. And
that's strange. I've never knock on wood. I've never had any issues with that. I know Frederick had issues with that before.
Yes, I spoke with him about that, and
did you ever catch one eating a regurg?
I wanted to talk to you about that. Yeah,
oh.
When people think regurg, it's like, they spit it out and they probably, oh, no. You go in there and it would be, can I swear? Fucking smeared everywhere. And
there's a Trap Talk network. You can swear.
Yeah. So I walked into the room, like, because I have a separate building here. I have my office, and the reptiles are in another area. But even in my old house, so yeah, you could just smell this putrid smell. I'm like, oh God, they did it again. And I go in. So here's the thing: it's they would puke it up and they'd rip it apart. I never really saw them doing this, but I would always see the end results. There'd be smears and crap and bones and a pelt, and then they'd one of the first times it happened, I took the thing away and the snake freaked because it was trying to re-eat it. And I'm thinking, okay, there's something missing because it's not breaking this down, or it can't digest, whether it was the bones or whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'd find a hand or a partial tail, or foot, I should say, not a hand. And, what are you feeding these things anyway?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, like I say, it's almost like they debone it or wherever, and then they'd eat the remaining carcass. And it was just
bizarre.
Fun thing. So I'm like, well, yeah, they're not palatable. So then I was like exploring other things to feed, and I see there's like, so I should mention, I haven't had Boelens. I lost my last one in 2022. So they lived to be 16, almost 17 years old. And so the regurg thing was a reoccurring thing, like throughout. Sometimes I have periods where they'd be fine, like I say, almost a year or more, and then it would arise again. So
interesting.
Very frustrating. And I could never.
Yeah, I bet it's frustrating and also like really disgusting, and like I'm like I don't know the thought process about it with a snake. Like obviously you've got to expel what's inside, but then like, I wonder if it's just because they're still in that kind of mental state of like, I'm feeding, that I need to still consume it. But at the same time, it's like this repulsive pile of just trash.
I
I don't know. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know Frederick had a similar situation with stuff too, and then he changed some things and then it fixed it. So
yeah, like I say, I went to smaller. I started feeding smaller rats. Someone suggested cutting them just through the skin, through the pelt, so that the digestive acid could get in and maybe do their job a little bit better. I tried everything, and I thought, well, they're closely related to birds too, and I know a lot of times birds will, they eat rocks to grind up their food, and I thought, well, maybe in the wild they do partially do that. The animal's rolling on the carcass is on the ground picking up dirt and whatnot. They re-swallow it. Maybe it helps to digest, but that doesn't sound right because no other snake does that. So I don't know. It's just things that were going through my head, but never seemed to.
Well, that's how we solve problems, by brainstorming and coming up. No matter how outlandish some people think ideas are, it's a good base to start things. Yeah. Because that's how we figure stuff out. I mean, not to say that Boelens are eating rocks in the wild, but how you said, like, where
rolling in the dirt, exactly.
Rolling in the dirt, and they're consuming, because it's inevitable that they're going to be consuming any kind of biological matter that's in the environment as well, leaves, maybe some pebbles or what, who knows, but it's an interesting scenario with the regurgitation thing. I find it really frustrating too for the keepers that have to deal with it, because it's like, what's the problem? I mean, obviously, when you have an animal that's regurgitating, you immediately think it's something health related, as opposed to like a husbandry technique or a husbandry scenario where it's as simple as just excessive heat or excessive UV combined with heat in that matter. But yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm really happy to include on this podcast, because these are kind of scenarios for people that are working with these animals that might not have experienced it, or that are pulling out their hair because they're dealing with it right now. And they are like, oh, wow, it's because it's too hot, or, yada, yada. So, so once obviously you corrected your regurgitation issues, and your animals were like you said, 3 to 4 years old, around 6 or so feet long, give or take. What was your normal feeding regimen anyways with them when they were not throwing up stuff or anything like that?
So when they were young, they weren't babies, but they're like, well, 2 feet long, I guess. They sometimes they would refuse the rat pups. That's what I was feeding them. I did try mice once, but they weren't partial to mice. So I was doing the rat pups, and they could quite often be apprehensive with those. And I would do live, because obviously they're not gonna hurt the snake. So and then I read that you should try scenting with. Someone said try scenting with egg. I tried that. That never worked. Chicken soup, that never worked. And then someone mentioned quail down. So there's a farm not too far from me. Guy raises all kinds of different animals, and he lucky for me, he was raising quail, so I used to go down and just get a couple quail, and I just put them in the freezer to make sure any parasites were killed off first, right? Leave them for a good 48 hours, and then whenever I feed the babies, I would just take like you take the minus piece of down from one of these little quail chicks, like from the neck or whatever, and just put it on the rat's nose, and those snakes would freaking go ballistic. I couldn't get over the feed response. It was insane. Like so I thought, man, are they eating fowl in the wild too? Like there's something.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting topic, like dietary, the dietary scenario of wild animals versus captive. I mean, I find a lot just in general, not just with Boelens, but just with so many other species of snake that, fowl are just like, it's like, crack for them, it's like a go-to, like they're like, oh, I know what that is. Obviously not every species, but a lot of, many species are really prone to really just go nuts for it. And it's a good tool to utilize in feeding and husbandry wise. It's interesting. Like, I've never had any issues getting neonates or any individual animal to feed. Whenever I was raised, because I've raised up lots and lots of babies over the years and acclimated babies for people before I sent them out and this and that, and done all sorts of stuff with them. And I've always just gone right to like day old quail. Like that's just my go-to. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, every once in a while I'll try a pinky mouse, but it's like, there's, and with babies, it's an interesting thing too, because a lot of times they're very, very shy and very deliberate with their intentions and, what they're doing. It's like, as opposed to like a baby carpet python or something like that, where they're just like, bam, they grab it.
Mhm.
A lot of times Boelens will just kind of do like that slow grab, and then they coil it up and then they go for it. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I usually would, always I'll grab like day-old quail and, thaw them out and, and offer them then. And then, sometimes I'll just continue feeding them quail as they get bigger and bigger. And I have one animal currently that's about almost 3 now.
Mhm.
And I feed, for the most part, I feed, obviously rodents. But I also incorporate, quail or chick every once in a while as like, just, I'll throw some, like a wild card in there every once in a while. I'll just be like, oh, this is cool. And
Mhm.
he prefers quail over rats any day.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'll eat the rat, sometimes he doesn't. But
Mhm.
and I'll just wrap the rat up with the quail or the chick or whatever and rub it on him, and he eats it. But it's interesting, like that response that snakes have with bird is just
Mhm. Yeah.
and I've seen I remember one time, obviously, because when I'm out in the field doing stuff, I'm always observing, and I'm looking for potential prey sources, especially for babies, because like the behavior of what's going on once they hatch and they eventually leave the nest. It's like, what are they feeding? And then you've got all these like various layers of just like ancient vegetation that's been there for thousands of years, keeping all sorts of like little rodent colonies and probably little birds and frogs and things like that too. And I very rarely find any small prey items that I would think, except for like little skinks. I did
Right.
find skinks that were out there, but obviously I wouldn't try to feed skinks in captivity, because obviously there's not a real reason to, because the animals are feeding for me. And I didn't want to have a kind of like a foreign parasitic load introduced into the babies by offering and then it's like, okay, great, now all I want to eat is skinks. It's like, now I'm out there looking for skinks for baby Boelens. It's just not right.
Yeah.
But I have found birds in the same area. I did find a really pretty type of dove that was like literally feet above a nest. And like when I was in there, like documenting like the nest size and taking photos and getting temperatures and stuff like this, and trying to be all like non-invasive on the situation. Like my guy is right behind me, and he's like, he pulls out his air rifle and he shoots the bird, because they're like, oh, we're gonna eat it if it's not gonna. But regardless, I was able to photograph that, and that they are I'm sure they're feeding off of them. They're an opportunistic animal. So, but yeah, no, it's the quail thing is always an interesting thing, why they prefer that over and I'm sure somebody knows, I just don't know. But
Yeah.
so you eventually continued on doing rodents. Your animals kept going, and started taking rodents more readily then.
Yep. Yes, that's right. And I had considered trying the hairless variety rats, but it was too hard to source those. So I thought, you know what, I just reduced the size of the rats. So you're asking me the frequency? Yeah, I would feed them like twice a month or so. Except the female, I'm trying to breed her and cycle her, I would feed her more, obviously. So
I find, I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just want to say, I always steered clear of jumbo rats and stuff like that. I know people have had success without issue, but I just cleaning up after one of those things comes back. Ugh, I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, or the worst case scenario when regurg is a giant rat. Oh, that's terrible.
That's what I mean.
And then a lot of things too. Like I get asked by people, is like, oh, what do you what do you think one of the reasons with the reproductive stuff is? And I'm like, one of them is, I think animals are way overfed in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of my opinions. Obviously, that we're not at a consistent state where we're producing them every season, with regularity, to say that heavier animals are better than leaner animals. And with that being said, like I feel like a feeding regimen for animals, obviously comparing neonates to young animals to young adults to adults is different. I'm always offering a little bit more frequent for babies. I try to offer like at least once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week, like a really small, like little quail, just to get them past that, fragile state. Because obviously in the wild, it's really infrequent when they're feeding. from what we can speculate. But in captivity, we're in control of the scenario. So it's like my goal is to get them past that real fragile state, and then I'll start kind of weaning them down. And I feed my adults, twice or 3 times a month, and they're perfectly fine. And I feel like that also lowers the aggression level with them as well too, because they build up this really strong feeding response in captivity, where that door or that cage or whatever opens and it's like it's on, as opposed to being a very calm animal, which they are by nature. Even with my animals now that I'm raising, it was funny. I had Frederick visiting a couple weeks ago, and he was like, I can't get over the fact that your snakes are so calm. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, oh, the second I walk in the room, my guys are like looking around. He goes, your animals are just kind of sitting there doing what they're doing. And I was like, open the cage, reach in there. And he puts his hand out. One of them crawls out, checks them out, walks around. He goes, I couldn't do that with my animals. Second I open the door, it's like, bam, and I do have a big female, a larger female of mine that's on exhibit at the zoo. And she has that behavior where she is just like, you could hold her eventually, but my goal is not to take them out all the time and all this stuff. I want to promote, calm, natural behavior, especially on exhibit and my animals personally. So it's like, it doesn't really bother me. She just has a really strong feeding response.
Yeah. And I dealt with the same thing. One of my females, she was always, look, when I go in the room, they're pretty calm, but as soon as I open the door, I would really have to be careful with my females, especially, having my animals are kept in a separate building, and like the bigger snakes, well, they were the biggest I had. I had to learn to go of it. He was fine, but they're all under lock and key. And because my female, there was times, she'd be up to get me, man. And she's, she'd have a crazy feed response. And so. Yeah,
it's a strong animal. And, and nobody wants to take a bite from, nobody wants to take a bite from anything. It's just like, but especially like a large, like 8-foot python, it's like, no, I don't want to do this.
I remember, just on a side note, quick bite from when one of my Aspidites, my black-headed python male, got me for the first time, and people said, "Oh, snakes there's no strength in their bite." Well, let me tell you, like there was some strength in his bite, and I never, I've been nicked by the Boelens. Fortunately, I never, they never really muckled on. I always seemed to get out of the way, or I'd luck out. It would just be a quick glancing blow. It wasn't like a, but. Those the blackheads could definitely give a good bite.
Oh yeah, like all the wombas and the blackheads.
Oh yeah,
they go through like this. Like there's a switch that goes off, and those things just like it's like go time on them.
They just. I always have tongue depressors close by, and I could just very easily get them off.
Yeah,
not a deal at all.
Nice. Right? That's smart. That's smart. I know some people are like, oh, spray them in the mouth with alcohol and all this, and I'm like, I don't really. Yeah, I don't want to. If it's a really large snake, like. If I'm having to work with like a really big retic or a big anaconda or something like that, then I'll be like, all right, I'm going to put a little bottle of alcohol here, or or something just to kind of make them be like, oh, this isn't good, but not on Boelens or not like that. So you got your animals, obviously they were doing well for you. You addressed any other health issues that you had. Did you run into any other issues with them aside from just the regurgitation and then the early onset of the mites when you receive them, which is, a lot of people are like, oh God, they're mites. And I'm like, I know mites are horrible, but with today's, viruses that we're learning about, I'd rather deal with mites than anything. Because, like there's so many things that are viral now and all this stuff that are, all that stuff. But did you run into any other health issues or anything along the way?
Yeah, so with my female and my larger male, probably 3 times, I guess, they would get the swollen eye syndrome. It would look blocked, occluded.
I've seen that.
It would fill up. So I would very carefully prop open the mouth because I heard, oh, you can have it surgically operated where they cut the spectacle. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to go there. So I very gently, carefully opened up the mouth, propped it open, took a swab because they have tear ducts in there. Some people may not know, or one with their tear ducts, but they are ducts. It was occluded, so I cleared it, and soon after that, it drained within itself.
It's interesting.
It cleared up. So, but that did help. It did happen multiple times. One time, I did have to get some drops to put in because it didn't clear up, but I never did the surgical procedure, and they always did need to return to normal. Now, whether that was from a bad strike, they irritated, or the one time it was because the duct seemed to be plugged and it drained for me, no problem. So I would just advise people that if they run into this problem, don't go don't prefer the surgical procedure right away. Try and do
I had an animal I was working with at the zoo that was before, because I was at the zoo for like almost 13 years, and there was an old animal that was there prior to me that was I think that was the oldest animal I've ever worked with, and it lived to 23 years old with me there.
Wow.
Excuse me. And I remember one thing about it was it had these really kind of bulbous looking eyes. And I was always like, wondering what it was attributing to. And I just thought it was based like an old thing, kind of like an elderly kind of scenario. But the animal ate great, it shed great, it did what it did, it defecated perfect, urinated. And so I was just like, all right, whatever. It's just a cosmetic thing. As long as it's not affecting the animal, like, health wise, I'm not going to mess with it, but it was kind of comical because it had these very kind of large, kind of glassed over eyes. And I was like, well, I wonder if they're retained eye caps or anything like that. And, we would use a little magnifying glass or whatever at the vet there and find out, and it wasn't. So we just kind of left it alone. So I've seen that before, but it's interesting that I wonder what would cause an animal's, these ducks that you were talking about to kind of get impacted. I wonder if it's like where they like males will get like, with snakes, they'll get like blocked hemipines or something like that. Or I wonder if it's like, it's weird. So, but go ahead.
Mucus buildup. Well, I mean, sometimes when they shed, you see the nasal cavities. You would see like long, almost looked like a sperm plug. It wasn't, but it was the same kind of consistency. You know what I'm talking about when they just where the nasal.
But I do like, it's not telling people, it's like, you don't always have to go the surgical route on things.
No,
a lot of times you can correct things with just basic, things that we have. Obviously you don't want to be, working medically on your animals, because unless you are a vet or, in that, industry, because we don't want to promote people like doing, at home procedures and stuff like that. But it is really interesting to note that, that those ducts were clogged. I don't know what that would be about or what, but, and it didn't affect the animals with, it was just just a cosmetic thing, really, right? It seemed.
They still wanted to eat and stuff. Even that's the thing with my Boelens, even till their dying day, they still, but they were hurting themselves. They were wasting away. Their skin was so thin. It was awful to see. And you've probably seen that. I talked to another a zookeeper from Fort Worth, like before, when my animals were very young, and he had been keeping Boelens, and he was trying to breed them. His name is Tim Trout, and he was telling me.
I know Tim.
Okay, that's a cool guy. I like him. But so he told me about that. He's like, I work with Boelens. I tried to breed them. I did rain cycles and all these different things he had tried. And he's very knowledgeable. And then he said, have you ever seen them when they get to the end of their life? He said their skin almost gets like tissue paper, and it's really hard. They almost tear. And I thought, oh, good God, I hope I never see that. Because I've had older snakes die on me before. But no, sure enough, like that's my animals got to that point where they had long tears on their skin with blood, and it was just, but they still wanted to eat. But there was no way to. I thought the humane thing to do was to put them down, because they're just hurting themselves, and it was going to open up to infections and stuff. So it was really, I must say, it was really sad. Like, the ending for them. That's how they all when they did check out. And
what was their ages when they started getting to that point where they were reaching the end of the life with you?
I'd say like I had, there'd be little thing, probably a year, I guess, before beginning to end, like there'd be little things, and I'd be like, well, I'm still, they're my pets, I love them, could they keep
I mean like their ages,
when they passed, so they would have been around roughly 17, I guess, because they're roughly,
and I do have to say though, like, it really says a lot about your husbandry, because like all the animals that we've talked about in the past and just recently, like all the animals that you've had have lived very long lives with you. Like, you had animals that were in their 18, I'm sure you had animals in their 20s and things like that too. So it's like, it's a testament of time. It's nice to see, these are not, animals are like, oh, they were 8 years old and they started developing these issues, because then I would be like, okay, there's something else going on, not to say that there wasn't some underlining issue that you just were not aware of. That wasn't presenting itself aside from just a visual thing at age 17, where their skin became, much thinner and were, susceptible to tears and things like that. So, I really do commend you for doing such a good job with your animals. I mean, it's our responsibility to try to do everything and anything we can while we have these animals, regardless if it's a Boelens python or a green snake or anything, So you did okay, so you did not have success reproducing, but you got very close.
I got close a few times, under the tutelage of Frederick, because I was communicating with them, and we had the
at what time did you start implementing a kind of a breeding thought process or a scenario where like, okay, I'm going to try to start reproducing these animals now? Like, what was your time?
It was usually like late October, early November, when I would I didn't so much change the light cycles as much, but I would start cooling them, and I'd start the cooling. But usually into January, February, they'd be breeding. They'd frequent lockups. And my female, she did a pre-ov twice, very visual, I could see, but then she didn't ovulate, and she didn't make eggs for me, unfortunately. But she was definitely very swollen, and multiple breedings. Used to see them breeding all the time. In my smaller male, when I put him in, he would lock up much quicker than the larger male that I had at the time. And but it's very, very interesting behavior, I must say. Just watching the way they do it, how they move their tail all around and they spur everywhere. And I'm like, why don't you just go and crawl on top and lock up? But did
you try ever two males to the one female, or was it always a single pairing?
I didn't have to. I tried that with my black-headed pythons. I didn't have success breeding those, but I had tried multiple things, and they could get quite aggressive with each other, like even bite each other. But with the Boelens, I never, there's always visibly sperm plugs in their sheds and stuff like that, and I could see. Well, I always thought that they were locked up. A lot of times they were in the hide box, but they're all, their tails were locked, and so I just assumed, it was going to be successful. Unfortunately, it wasn't.
At what age did you first start introducing them?
I waited till I grow things up slow. I don't rush anything, and I don't power feed or anything like that. So I would always, they're probably around 5 years old, 4 or 5, I guess, when I started doing that.
Okay. And you saw at that age, you started seeing, obviously, breeding interest from the males, right?
Yeah, especially
the female was accepting on all this stuff as well, too. Did you ever see any kind of like, thrashing or any behavior from her saying, because I've seen sometimes where the females will kind of like flip a coil up and they'll do like some big heavy hissing and things like that.
Yeah, I used to call it like coil bunting. Yeah, she'd bump them off, and she'd get pissed off. Or if she didn't want him in there, she would just start cruising the cage, and she'd look restless. I'm like, okay, time to take him out, because I didn't want to stress her. So it would just be a trial and error thing, and I just put him in for a few days and see a few locks, and then if he wanted to get out, I would take him out, and obviously I would always separate them for feeding, and I even made like a subterranean hide box. So under the cage, I had PVC pipe going to another nest chamber, but she would never go in there. So maybe it should have been outside, and I should have had more moss and stuff in there. It was basically just like, it was always very sterile, like what I used, but maybe I should have used more natural. To do it again, I would have a much more naturalistic cage, I think, and I would implement natural light instead of just kind of the lab setting I had here. Like, I absolutely love how you have your natural setups. And
thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So
I think what it does, I think it's like, obviously, like in my mindset, like I want to provide like the most naturalistic enclosure I can for them, just because I want it, like they deserve it. But that's not knocking people for doing, simplistic sterile enclosures, because, obviously it still works with husbandry and reproduction and stuff like that too. Like Frederick has a very simple enclosure setup design, and he's very prolific with his success. And I know he's going to do it again too, which will be very exciting, and then same with Scott. He's got a very simplistic, design where he's got, I believe it's 2 tiers. He's got a shelf for them to bask. He's got a little bit of rock work and some fake vegetation in there, and he's having success as well too. So, it's not to say that, it doesn't work that way. I think what it does is it really depends on the individual as well as the scenario. I mean, obviously there's more work in maintaining a more naturalistic enclosure. I'm pulling out what hair I have left because they're knocking stuff over all the time. But I feel like, in my personal opinion, I feel like they respond better to that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's various ways to do things. And I know some of the people that have successfully reproduced them in the past have had very basic setups too. And it just works. I think a lot of it is, what a lot of keepers need to understand, and a lot of keepers are needing to learn is, being able to properly read their animals, because that's everything. You can set up an incredible enclosure, but the animals are too stressed out for whatever reason. And being able to notice that is going to help you go over that hurdle to be able to correct things, to be able to have success in the long run. And not just success in breeding, because obviously we want to be able to successfully breed these animals more consistently, but also just to the point where we're at now, where we're successfully maintaining them, being healthy animals. They're growing, they're living long lives, this and that. And we're just missing that one other last factor, which we're going to get eventually, with more consistency, just with the people that are involved, and now how we're more or less having, all these options for sharing information, this new platform that I'm working on, and then just, communication. I mean, we need to get over these egos, because we're not going to do anything good. You're not going to make $1 million breeding Boelens pythons. It doesn't work that way. We should be working with animals because we love working with animals, and we're wanting to be able to understand these creatures that are depending on us. So these are just steps that we need to, continue to do that. And I commend you also with what you've dealt with and what you've done, as well as just the longevity of keeping your snakes and things like that. I mean, it's a love, and it takes time, especially, since you're, a musician, you've got a family, we all have all these things going on, but, these animals rely on us, and it really, it's our obligation to do them right, so,
definitely.
With that being said, is there anything like you think, like, obviously you said you weren't successful, but you got very close. I share that frustration as well.
I know.
Is there anything that you would kind of like really like key in or point out for new, hobbyists that are interested in working with this species? Like, what like words of wisdom would Mike Jodry give to the new generation of people that are interested in working with Boelens pythons?
I would say, you got to put a lot of respect into the people like you and the old school workers, what they've done, and just they've come a long way. And, and don't be too hard on yourself, obviously, if you fail, because we all do somewhere along the lines. But I would say just be smart about what you're getting, and just realize, the commitment involved with keeping an animal like this. Like I say, they're very long-lived animals, and where they can be.
They can. Yeah.
Just do your homework and make sure you really know what you're getting into, and you have good contacts. People, like I say, that's what I did. I put the feelers out early on and made really good contacts. I traveled to different shows and symposiums, and it just tried to, brainstorm as much as I could. Fortunately, I was able to do that, and just, build relationships, people I trusted, and then, you're going to find bad people along the way too, but you're going to find hopefully many more good, and you can use that to go forward, and, hopefully.
This is how life is. You got to go through the shit to find the good stuff.
That's right. Exactly. So yeah,
there's a lot of shit, unfortunately, that we've got to go through.
Definitely.
And I think one of the things, like, that I really try to instill with a lot of younger people coming into the hobby or just having interest is, like, don't be afraid to communicate with people, as well as some of the old schoolers. Like, I mean, like a lot of the old schoolers, like I've known, and I do know, it's just in that generation where it's not, they're not as vocal about certain things, and that's fine, but, being able to approach somebody like, I was in like, the shadows of Paul Miles and Stan Taras and you and Keith and Frederick and all these people. And it's like, I was that kid, that was like, hey, I am infatuated with these animals. I want to talk to everybody and anybody and learn everything that I can. So it's like, I'm going to put myself into that world. And I feel like that's something that the younger generation needs to learn. They need to be able to, communicate, physically one-on-one. It shouldn't be a computer or a cell phone. Making that physical connection with somebody where you're at a show and you're just like, oh, hi, my name is so-and-so. I've been following your work. I would really like to ask you some questions. Those are important things because, like I said, it helps weed out the assholes. And it also helps kind of like open up ideas for different things that we can consider, because, a lot of these old schoolers, this generation, like they really, man, they had it tough. Like it was exciting because like we didn't have, or I don't say we, because I wasn't part of that generation, but they had this, time where, you really had to do your homework on certain things. And it was called going to the library, getting a library card or something, and reading about these environments or these animals, where now we have the option of, typing it in on Google or Chat GTP or whatever, and it's like, but we've lost the connection of physically talking to a person and getting to know them and asking questions that'll help us push forward with, our passion and the hobby, not just with Boelens pythons, with everything. And there are thousands of people out there that are so wonderful that want to, that get excited, talking to somebody. Like, I mean, I don't think of myself as anything special than just a person that is passionate about a species of snake. That I just want to, that's all I want to do the rest of my life. And I'll get people that'll come up to me and sit there and be like, oh, can I talk to you about this? I'm like, I love it because it's allowing me to nerd out, which I'm waiting for that opportunity every day, but it also is allowing me to kind of maybe help somebody else out, in an area that they're just not uncomfortable or they're just not comfortable with, or they haven't been exposed to. So it's like, it really is a beneficial thing. And, as we are kind of, dying down on this episode, I'm really happy that I was able to get you on, man. It's, time is, time is so fast these days. And it's just like, we forget, people that are important to us in our life. And, it's like, we really need to make those efforts because like, it's, in a blink of an eye, it's over, man, and it's like, we need to get together again. I might have to try to come up to Canada.
Well, I have to come and see your zoo. And, I was just gonna say, the last time I did a herp trip was 2015. I did one of the green tracks tours through Peru, which was absolutely
incredible. So you went with Bill Lamar?
Unfortunately, he rolled his ankle, so he couldn't go. But Dante Fenolio was there.
Oh, I know Dante very well, and I'm good friends with Bill too. So I'm going to give Bill shit about him rolling his ankle because
And Tom Crushwell was there, but he had.
Cool.
But what did he do? He broke his toe, so he.
He was. I remember that. I remember that trip. I remember that trip now.
We'd go and collect the animals, come back. Well, not. I was kind of in the middle of the pack, right? I had 3 kids at home, young kids, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to get back. I was very cautious, but it was amazing. Great experience, man.
That's awesome. We need to get together.
For sure.
And I'm working on, with. MJ was so generous about offering me this platform to start putting out, really good Boelens content and interviewing all these people. And I'm hoping people are enjoying it as it progresses. And I've got another guest that I'm going to be bringing on at another time, who's a good friend of mine. And we talked about doing this, like doing a Boelens symposium because the time's now. I mean, there are enough keepers to do it. Yep. There's enough really great, positive, positive non-assholes that want to incorporate themselves in this kind of environment. And we were talking about doing this, in before, and then COVID hit, and all shit. Yeah. I mean, it's it's crazy to think about that. So obviously you are on my invitational list.
Well, I would love to come. Yeah, for sure.
and all that. So, but as I'm wrapping this up, once again, thank you. Is there any message you would like to end this out with to anybody or industry or just something that you feel is beneficial that people can utilize? If it's Boelens related, that's great. If not, that's awesome too.
Yeah, no, it'll just echo what I said before. People new getting into reptiles and stuff. Like I say, just know what you're getting into, because you're going to be keeping these pests for a long time. It's a huge commitment. One thing I will say with me changed my mind. Early on, I steered clear of things like chameleons and species like that because they were so short-lived. But at this point in my life, I do keep some panthers. I have a few different gecko species. But sometimes pick what's going to suit you and you can thrive with, or if you can help the species thrive. Pick something that's going to fit with your lifestyle,
Well said. Well, once again, Mike, thank you for everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like, follow, share Boelens Python Roundtable, Project Black Python, and of course, the Trap Talk Reptile Network. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day or evening.
Thank you so much, Ari. We really appreciate what you're doing, and I always look forward to your next trip.